Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing. Dan Illman, Mike Beer with another edition of Breeders' Cup Focus. In this video, we're going to take a preview of the Breeders' Cup Sprint. We'll throw up the top contenders, and as of right now, several weeks before the Breeders' Cup, the Sprint is still sort of sorting itself out. Jack Christopher, number 2 on our DRF list, the preliminary odds made by DRF's Brad Free, also being considered for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Kamari, the filly, she's likely to run here, although she also will probably be pre-entered in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. At the end of the day, Jackie's Warrior is the horse to beat. He was the beaten favorite in this race last year. He's probably the best sprinter in the country.
Yeah, the sprint division feels a little thin this year, Dan. We'll see, how the race shapes up come race day. But either way, Jackie's Warrior is going to show up there as the horse to beat, even though he comes off of a loss in his final prep.
As you see, Jackie's Warrior has a career best Beyer speed figure of 110. When he shows up with his A race, he is very tough to beat, but he also can be had. We saw that in last year's Breeders' Cup Sprint. Although he did emerge from that race with an injury, he was beaten in his most recent start at Saratoga. Let's watch that race right now. We see Jackie's Warrior is a heavy favorite in here, and he had to work on the lead. He's going to get run down by a pretty good horse, though, Cody's Wish, who will bypass the sprint and go to the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Jackie's Warrior ran just fine in this race.
Yeah, he did. I mean, ultimately, it's still a pretty disappointing loss, Dan. Even as you say that, when you start looking at the overall body of work for Jackie's Warrior, the 109 Beyer he earns in that race where he just got run down by Cody's Wish is just 1 point off of his career best, his career top. So, I mean, I guess he ran his race there. It was still a little disappointing, at least in my opinion, that he didn't win the race. He took a little pressure on the lead. That hadn't happened in his prior 2 races, which were just sort of public workouts. And so maybe that got to him a little bit, Dan, where they had to actually use him a little bit early in the race, and he paid the price late.
If Chad Brown does decide to run Jack Christopher here in the sprint, it'll be an interesting Jack versus Jackie's matchup. Jack Christopher is the best 3-year-old one-turn horse in the country. Looked so good winning the Woody Stevens on the Belmont Stakes undercard. They tried him in the Haskell going 2 turns and 1 1/8, and it was a bridge too far for him, but they cut him back last time out at Saratoga in the Allen Jerkins, and Jack Christopher does what Jack Christopher does in these one-turn races. He kind of dominates, maybe not the strongest fields in the world, although the runner-up Gunite's a hard little trier.
Yeah, the runner-up's not a bad horse. This is just Jack Christopher proving himself to be better than the 3-year-olds in the one-turn races. I mean, all 4 one-turn races since his career debut were either 7 or 8 furlongs. That he's only been 6 furlongs once in his life. That was in his career debut, which he won very easily. Is cutting back from 7 to 6, if this is where they run him, is that a big deal? It probably isn't, considering the tactical speed Jack Christopher has, but he's still taken a huge step up in class.
Kamari is the filly that will be taking on the boys if she opts for this instead of the Filly and Mare Sprint. We'll watch her most recent start against fellow fillies and mares. This is the Gallant Bloom at Belmont Park, and we turn into this at Aqueduct, Belmont and Aqueduct. Lady Rocket's a pretty good filly. And Lady Rocket was able to get to the lead, and we know she really likes Aqueduct. Kamari's very confidently handled, and she just eventually runs right by Lady Rocket. Kamari is a filly that's getting good again, and I think that the reason she's here is the distance. I think they like her a lot more at 6 than 7.
Yeah, that's probably true. It'll be interesting to see if they ultimately do decide to run her against the boys here. I personally don't mind her going 7, but maybe 6 is the optimum distance for her. She's in really good form. The fillies that she's been beating, even though she's getting really solid Beyer speed figures for her races, the fillies she's been beating do not match up with some of the horses she'll meet in the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
For American Theorem is an underrated horse coming in from Southern California. He is in very good form right now. He is a horse that likes to rally from off of the pace. I would not want to give this horse short shrift. He might have to take a slight step forward if one of the big 2 or 3 show up with their A race, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if American Theorem pulls off an upset from off the pace.
Yeah, he's going to be a dangerous horse in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. They're supposed to go in front of him. They're supposed to be pacing this race. He wants to make a little bit of a run from out of it. His last three races, since they finally cut this horse back to sprint, his last three races are all very good. And even though he didn't win the Pat O'Brien, Dan, and the winner of that race, certainly ran a pretty big race in his own right, the trips, might have made a little bit of a difference there.
Perhaps the sprint division's looking for a new face, Mike, and the number 5 Elite Power has sort of come out of nowhere. He won the Vosburg last time out. Now, the Vosburg, like the Carter, one of its spring counterparts in the sprint division, isn't what it used to be maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, but Elite Power looked good in that race, has run some fast races, and it's quite possible we've yet to see his best.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen his best yet. He's obviously really starting to find himself now for Bill Mott. The Vosburg was the 4th win in a row for him. I guess it's a little bit like some of the other horses we've already talked about, Dan. Maybe 6 won't be his optimum distance, but this horse is just getting better every time they send him out there. His last 4 wins, very convincing, very easy. He's getting faster, and he's got a little bit of tactical speed too.
Let's look through 6 through 10 on our BC Focus sprint list. Gun Night, we saw run second to Jack Christopher. He's an honest horse, also could be considered for the Dirt Mile. CZ Rocket is a true veteran, and he's coming into this race, Mike, off a good performance. I think he's sort of exposed against Grade 1 company, but he's run well in Kentucky in the past, and he has some races.
Yeah, he's got some races on the go back if you feel like he's going to be able to get to those. He did take a little bit of a step forward in his most recent start. And listen, we've already sort of touched on it a couple of times. This isn't the strongest sprint division we've ever seen, Dan. There's a lot of filler in here.
Manny Wah likes Keeneland, came up the rail last time out to win a stakes race there in his final prep. But as you see, Manny Wah, Willie Boy, Long Range Toddy, these 3 horses have yet to crack the 100 buyer plateau. They're going to have to improve. They're all going to have them nailed on tight to catch Jackie's Warrior, who is the speed, the class, and maybe simply the best horse in this year's Breeders' Cup Sprint.